Hi, everybody. My name is Alice Loy, and I work with creative startups. And you are joining us for the inaugural Creative Industries Week here in New Mexico. So thank you for giving of your time and your energy. The Creative Industries Division is a new division established within the New Mexico Economic Development Department. And there were some champions from across the state who worked with Rena Skapansky and Jeff Steinborn to put together House Bill 8. And then last year, the budget was approved to provide a little bit of funding to get the division going. So one of the things that people have been asking is, how will this division help businesses, creative businesses, and nonprofits across New Mexico to thrive? And one of the questions that we are looking at tonight is, how can New Mexico's new Creative Industries Division be a great partner for the private sector? So tonight's topic is regional governments as creative economy partners. And we have with us Danika Padilla. I am going to read a quick bio of Danika. She has done way too many rad things in her life to go through her whole bio. But Danika has a unique background in terms of her background sits at the intersection of creative economy, government, and private sector businesses. Danika is a dynamic change maker who is passionate about building strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities. With over a decade of experience building relationships and strategic initiatives that bring people together, she has served in leadership roles for public, private, and nonprofit clients, mostly recently heading Impact at Meow Wolf. And that's how I got to know Danika years ago. Danika is the daughter of a teacher and a social worker. She has advocated for community-led priorities at the state and national level since an early age. Danika worked on government policies and with government leaders, including clients at public affairs firm Rio Strategies, and served in leadership roles for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller, Attorney General Raul Torres, Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver. She has worked for nonprofit organizations, Washington Conservation Voters, Washington Environmental Council, People for Puget Sound, and worked on environmental policy on Capitol Hill. So Danika, thank you for sharing your time with us. Very grateful.
Thanks, Alice. So glad to be with y'all.
Yeah, we have about 20 people here, and I will do my best, everybody, to watch the Q&A. But if I don't, please be patient with me because I might get too wrapped up in our conversation. So Danika, when I first invited you to join this conversation, I asked you, what does an inclusive creative economy look like to you? When you think about that, what does that look like here in New Mexico? And you had some interesting thoughts.
Well, it's a great question because I think the creative economy is still to be defined, that there's a lot of definitions still happening. And to me, the creative economy means that we are prosperous, that people and creatives don't have to make a living from their day job or multiple jobs, that they can make a living from their creativity. A creative economy means we have a lot of different types of creatives. Painting, sculpture, literary arts, art educators, performing art, fine art, contemporary, lighting, sound. There's so many different types of creative and artists. And I think it's important to think about the ecosystem that they're in and creating together, besides on their own. And I think that we really need here in New Mexico to make sure that our creative economy is centered around historically marginalized people and has Black, Indigenous, people of color in the center of our creative economy. And we need that in our leadership and programs and grant making especially as we establish the new creative industries division.
Hmm.
I also want to make sure
How would New
go ahead.
Mexico's creative economy be different if, because I think some of our work in building the strategy for the division is we've heard from a lot of communities of color that they don't perceive, their experience is not that they are at the center of our state's creative economy. How would we be a different economy if people who have been overlooked, underserved, if they were at the center of our creative economy strategy, grants, activities?
Yeah, it's a big question, Alice. And the solution is not simple. Um, but I think what it really means is that the priorities and the initiatives reflect the people, and they
Mm.
reflect the people across the state. Because 1 in 4 New Mexicans identifies as rural.
Yeah.
And that's an important piece of this as well, not only supporting, BIPOC individuals, but supporting all of those folks that
Mhm.
are, across the state. And so, I don't think we have all the answers, but it is really important to make sure that those folks are represented in leadership, in advocacy, in the feedback that we're getting, and just part of the process to make sure that the work reflects them and what they need in their communities.
I'm wondering if you can think of people, and maybe as we continue, more stories would come to you, but I bet over the last 10 years, you've found entrepreneurs, creatives, who were maybe overlooked. I know I have at creative startups who were overlooked or misunderstood. We talk about weird and wonderful at creative startups, and who then broke through and were the vanguard. I mean, Meow Wolf is a great example, but there are so many examples. And I'm wondering how could a division or a mayorship, a city council, an arts council, a government agency do a better job of being open and accessible to those weird and wonderful people who are building the next creative economy, who are doing the defining of and building that next creative economy? What works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's constant feedback. I think that there are creatives and folks, have a different lifestyle here in New Mexico. And, we do have to meet them where they're at, as well as bring programs to them and bring those feedback opportunities to them. I think it's also really important that we partner with organizations that they feel comfortable in. A good example here in Santa Fe is Make Santa Fe. Make Santa Fe has a ton of artists and creatives that are there, right? It's a trusted space. And, working with an organization like that to get feedback, to bring opportunities is really important. So I think that it's, those relationships, and it's all about the relationships that you build.
And getting out there. I think
Absolutely.
in the process of doing this, a lot of these folks were maybe able to meet our team of researchers, Mike and Rashawn, and they stepped, put their feet on the ground in something like 57 New Mexico communities to hear what people need, what they think. And even then, they felt like there were a lot of disconnects, and that there were, so Rashawn, as you know, runs Earthseed Black Arts Alliance, and he was feeling like in towns he just wasn't seeing Black creatives come forward, that they weren't hearing that this was going on. And so there's still a lot of work to help bridge local government activity with the people who are truly embedded in community.
Absolutely. And I think a word I mention is ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just one artist creating one arts nonprofit. This is a group of folks. And we have to make sure that we're talking to everybody, and taking that feedback as we can in improving the outreach. I have a lot of experience in other communities as well. Nevada, Colorado, Texas, a lot of our neighbors have similar issues reaching creatives. But I think that New Mexico, it is important that we get out into every single county and talk to those organizations and leaders. It's really important.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask, we met with a major creative company based in New Mexico a couple months ago. And we sat down with their leadership and we said, what could a division do to support your company, your employees? We wouldn't want you to leave New Mexico. We need you here. And they sort of had this blank look on their face. And I said, well, sorry, do I need to rephrase the question? And they just started laughing and said, no one from the government has ever asked us that question. And I thought, wait, so you're saying that we're not competing? And now I don't work for the government. And so, I'm not the government going out to ask these questions. But it occurred to me that states around the country compete to keep thriving businesses, right? They go and talk to leaders and say, what do you need? They pay attention to unions. They pay attention to people in their community to understand how can we provide an environment where you can thrive and you can keep becoming more profitable, hopefully paying your people more and better, et cetera. What are some of the things that you have seen? And maybe it's at Meow Wolf, maybe it's other places you've worked where local governments have done a good job partnering with business leaders to make sure that they were providing. First thing that person said was, it would be great if higher ed would graduate people in our area, like in our particular sector with the technical expertise we need, because we don't want to hire from out of state. We want to hire New Mexico kids, but we end up having to go out of state. And I thought, well, that seems like an easy conversation. Do you have other examples of how a local government can help creative business thrive here?
Yeah, absolutely. Local government is key to the creative economy. I run a business with my husband. I've worked for Meow Wolf. I have seen how hard it is to run a business here in New Mexico, and just how hard it is to run a business, period. It's really challenging. And so I think that, more government officials and elected officials, need to talk with businesses more regularly, to be honest, and ask those questions. As Alice was saying, a lot of organizations don't get asked the questions of what can we do to support you. And I think that more people need to be asking. And bringing business to the table sooner on initiatives. A good example here is there's been so much work around workforce development and workforce learning for students. And, having been part of those coalitions, I found it really interesting that businesses were kind of treated on the side. They weren't necessarily part of the, big plannings. I think some businesses were engaged, but some were not. And I think that, we do need more businesses at the table, and identifying who those people are is really important. And providing those opportunities for businesses to give feedback as well.
Yeah, and the creative economy is interesting because so much of the data around creative economy actually is looking at nonprofits. Right. So I run a nonprofit. Creative Startups is a 501c3. But in my research, nonprofits are not job creators. They're just not meant to be. Our job is to solve particular social problems that a for-profit really probably wouldn't be able to solve very well because it wouldn't be profitable. There wouldn't be wealth creation through it, et cetera. And so I think that for the creative economy in the US, by measuring only nonprofits, we tend to sort of cut ourselves off from the opportunity to build businesses that are creative. And I'm just curious, how do you bridge? Because a lot of the nonprofits do very important work. A lot of the arts And youth programs are super important, especially as our schools do less around creativity. So we need both. It's a both and. And I'm curious, have you seen other states do this well? What could we learn? And how could we measure the impact of creativity in New Mexico differently?
Yeah. Well, I think the creative industries in Colorado is a great example. They were
Crushing it.
established in
We have
2010.
10
They've been
times more
around.
creativity. Why are they doing so
Exactly.
well?
Well, it's because they started this organization, back in 2010, right? So they have a
Okay.
little bit of a head start. And, I think that it's one of the first steps, right, is setting that goal of like what do we want to achieve together. And and starting with goals, even if they're small goals, but also wanting to establish those high and lofty goals. I think that the Colorado has done that really well and integrated those goals with their economic development priorities as a state. And I love that New Mexico's Creative Industries Division is part of our Economic Development Division. I think it is
Why do you
so
say that?
important
Why?
because the creative economy is the future economy. The creative economy is the place where more and more people are going to find their work across the globe. And if we are not investing in creatives, then we are missing out on the future of how we work and how we are as people.
When you think about what could go wrong for the creative economy, AI is on the forefront of everybody's minds. And yet I read a New York Times article this morning. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It doesn't matter. That AI is waning. In other words, the expense of implementing AI is so obscene that most businesses and organizations are like, no, we're not doing that. Because the ROI just isn't there yet. And a lot of people were sort of up in arms. Oh, creativity will be replaced by AI, which is ludicrous. What are some of the things you're seeing in your space? Because I know you and your husband's business is pretty creative tech heavy. I'm sure AI is something you guys talk about. In addition to AI, what are some other threats you see to that future economy?
Yeah. And I mean, I think AI is so interesting, and another big question, Alice. But I think that we've been seeing AI in the creative space as the
Wow.
technology is not quite keeping up with the hardware and the software. And, I think that's one issue. There's going to be, I think, a lot more resources being put into this technology, right? The hardware, the software, creating AI glasses, right? Everything that you create, on VR, AR is part of the creative economy. And so, I think there's a lot that's happening in AI that we need to be looking at for inclusion as well, and making sure that those spaces and the things that are created are, not taking, people's likenesses, for example. I think that's a big issue, but also taking in the creative economy, taking people's proprietary artwork,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The creative economy is a lot about intellectual property. And so we're talking about an image that you create, a piece of artwork that you create, right? You want to own that. And I think that AI is concerning for many people, of taking that artwork and not necessarily providing the proper credit, changing that artwork, and just making it, I think, really challenging for people to make a living based on their art.
Well, it's interesting though, because it could go right? Like I don't tend to be a doomsdayer, and so maybe I'm off, but some of the jobs that AI could do are jobs that none of us really want to do. And is there a pathway to letting AI take those jobs and freeing up more time and capacity for humans to be human? I don't know.
Yeah, it's important. I think a lot of the studies that are being done are saying that creativity is one of the number one things that we'll be looking for in the workforce and in innovation in the future. And so making sure that we are providing creative spaces and,
Mhm.
this, again, this creative economy for people to thrive is going to be really, really important. And the more we can invest in these initiatives now as a state, and as local organizations, we're going to be ahead of many of these other states and cities.
Yeah, it's really true. There are a couple of comments here I want to reflect on. One person asks, how might differently abled adults find out and participate in community art markets? And I think the notion of working with intermediaries, so there's also a bit in here about organizations that serve differently abled people as connectors. How have you seen local government do a good job engaging more people through kind of connector organizations, whether it's Earthseed Black Arts Alliance? I mean, there are some amazing connector organizations across the state. When does that work well?
Yeah, I mean, when we're all talking is when that works
Yeah,
well. And
yeah.
I do think it's so important that people with disabilities are included in the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals
Mhm.
that we set as organizations.
Yeah.
And I think the principles are the same, that we are making sure that we're connecting with organizations that serve those people. That could be organizations in the government, right? We have Colorado has a Denver Commission on People with Disabilities that I've seen collaborate with, nonprofits, private businesses, et cetera. And another good Denver example is Access Gallery. It's a nonprofit gallery space that trains people in inclusive access to people with disabilities,
That's cool.
and brings people with disabilities to create artwork across the city of Denver. And
Mhm.
so supporting organizations like that is, I think, a great example. But again, it's about trust and relationships. We're really not going to be able to reach folks unless you're spending the time to build relationships and trust that lasts a long time. And unfortunately, many of these historically marginalized communities, have a lack of trust, and so it takes trusted people to, bring these initiatives and really make them thrive.
Yeah, interestingly, too, we talked about rural earlier, and there's a note from someone here in Silver City, and one of my favorite places in New Mexico. Um, and we've sort of talked about some ideas for the division around building bridges between our rural communities and communities along the Rio Grande. So one of the things that rural communities are challenged with is there's just a slower flow of information. It's true whether you are in San Francisco, you go from San Francisco to Santa Fe, there's a slower flow of information in Santa Fe than there is in San Francisco. It's just sort of a human pattern. Um, but how could we move some of the things that we know are happening in our larger towns out to our smaller towns without making it a one-way exchange? Right. Like, I think we're not here to help rural. Rural doesn't need help. There's a lot of value in what is going on in our rural communities. And many times our rural communities, I think of them as they're the keepers of place and culture and that deep knowledge of who we are as a people. Um, but are there examples you've seen? You've mentioned Colorado. Are there other places that have come up with really innovative ways of building really beautiful connections between bigger cities and smaller towns where there's an exchange of flow of
Yeah.
resources and thinking and intellectual property and cultural ideas
Yes. I mean, I do think, I mentioned Colorado quite a bit. the city of Trinidad comes to mind.
Yeah, that's true. They've done a lot
Trinidad
there.
has been thriving as a designated art space. So I think that's something to be looking at, right? These designated cultural
The
districts are
creative
something
districts.
that, Colorado does and Texas does, that has really bolstered those economies, as well as, again, kind of looking at this. 1 in 4 people in New Mexico are rural. And so I think it's really important for the division and for us to be setting goals for rural communities specifically, and not necessarily lumping in goals for the rural communities with the urban communities, because they're not
Right.
the same. Issues are very different. Access to broadband is another issue I want to bring up.
Heck
In New
yeah.
Mexico, we have so many issues with broadband. I'm in Santa Fe. I can't even get internet half the time. And so, how can we make sure that these folks are connected to the resources? It starts with some of that basic infrastructure that really needs support. I think Silver City has a lot going on, and I think it's a place that has really leaned into the creativity and has brought that into the economy, right? So it's
Yeah.
leaders in Silver City are making those decisions, and they need to continue to bring the arts and the creative economy into those decisions that they're making.
This sort of relates to, there's another comment here about, New Mexico is relatively affordable. And we could be competing to bring young people here or New Mexicans back, sort of boomerang New Mexicans, because people can actually afford to live in New Mexico, but there aren't that many jobs. And one of the things that I've been curious about is how can government help attract opportunities for New Mexicans to work in companies that aren't based here? I don't know if that's something you've thought much about, but it strikes me that a lot of people would like to live in either rural New Mexico or Taos, or, somewhere in New Mexico where houses are $300,000, not $3 million, right?
I'm one of those people, Alice.
Right?
I
Yeah.
have lived in Seattle. I've lived in Seattle, DC, Austin, Santa
Yep.
Fe, and New Mexico is my favorite. Big city life is, not for me. I love Albuquerque. Love to get there. But I think it's really important. A lot of businesses right now that we're seeing, a lot of companies are starting to make people come back into the office. So I know that's been
Mm,
challenging for the workforce.
mm.
It's just kind of that, not knowing where we're going to be. But I do think that, we have to make sure that the economy and that we are bringing opportunities to folks that want to be here. And a lot of people want to be in New Mexico to be outdoors, I think, is another piece.
Yeah.
How are we collaborating with the outdoor division,
Yeah.
bringing those beautiful bike tracks for all of our mountain bikers. I think it's really important that we connect the dots for folks, that this is an affordable place, that there are things that you want to do, and we have Costco, right? We have the big things that we want. But we really do have to be thinking about who we're attracting. And I know that cities like Tulsa, Oklahoma has kind of implemented a new pilot program that I saw that is asking people to come work there. I think they're getting $10,000 if they last a year,
Oh
and
my
that's
gosh.
kind of directly to a person for moving there and working remotely. So I think there's initiatives like that we could be looking at as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, governments are that was sort of one of the big things that hit us over the head, is how much governments are competing for talent and figuring out ways to attract creative workers, whether they're, software or technologists, et cetera. And so I'm curious what New Mexico might be able to do along those lines without maybe putting $10,000 per person. I know the nation of Chile also did that, Chile, to attract more people to their entrepreneur ecosystem. And it works, but people move away, right? Once that money is gone, and so along those lines, one of the things that we were tasked with, as I think most people know, but I'll give background. So Creative Startups was the contractor hired to put together the strategy for the new division. And one of the pieces was to host a statewide conference. So one of the reasons that we're doing Zoom meetings is because of the challenge around being sure we can include rural people. We thought, if we just host this it isn't going to work whether you do it in Farmington, Las Cruces, Clovis, somebody's going to have to drive a lot. So we said, why don't we just do it online? So here we are, that's what we're doing here. But one of the questions that we were tasked with was figuring out how can the creative industries receive the same benefits that other industries do, right? So if you look at the automotive industry or the solar manufacturing industry, solar panel manufacturing, there are tax breaks, there are incentives, there are all kinds of government programs to support those industries. And the creative industries have never benefited from that. And when you look at, like, for example, the National Endowment for the Arts, or even philanthropic giving for the arts in the US, it's minuscule compared to what these other industries tend to receive. And so I'm curious what, Danika, you think about how, first of all, we could get organized as creative industries leaders to attract more support for the creative industries. And what can we learn from other industries? What are they doing that's so smart that they end up with a lot of support for their sectors?
Well, the good news is, Alice, that thanks to you and many others, we are well on our way. I think a lot of those industries are successful because they work together. And, you can get a lot more done as a team of people than you can as one, is, my philosophy. And so, I think it's really important that we team up together and collaborate on
So they
this.
have industry organizations that, yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah,
Uh, and that collaboration is, it could look like advocacy for friendly legislation. So I know you mentioned, tax breaks or grants. I know there's a new program that the New Mexico Science and Technologies I was like division, I guess, I just launched like
yes,
some grants to startups in New Mexico. That's the first time that has
yes,
happened. Um,
you're right.
you know, yeah, I think that's really important. I think organizations can, establish a brand, which is also really important. I wear my marketing hat here. In order to talk about what you do, you need a brand and a mission statement and
Mhm.
all of those fun things. It can take a while to get those going, but they're really important for the long term of the campaign. And I'm a former political worker, so am definitely thinking about how are you, again, campaigning for these things.
Mhm.
And so we have to be asking these questions and hosting events like this to get feedback, because we're not all going to agree on something, right? There are, I think, few and far between things that we absolutely agree 100% on. And so we do have to work together. I think a lot of industries like solar, aerospace, they really did get that start from collaboration
Mm.
and making sure that they are working together first, establishing those, agencies, establishing nonprofit organizations, hiring lobbyists together. I think there's many things that folks can do, and I think that we're well on our way to doing that, thanks to the work of so many here.
Interestingly, too, we have spent a lot of time thinking about data because without the data that's really representative of what's going on, um, it's hard to make the argument that a sector should really receive the support, whether it's the tax breaks or the whatevers. What kind of data do you think the CID should collect so that it can make compelling arguments?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need to look at, the data that's being collected from a lot of these other states. Again, Colorado, the state of Hawaii. I know Creative Startups has done quite a bit of work in so many places. And, I think we need to be looking at data such as, how many artists are in the ecosystem. What are they currently doing in that ecosystem? How can we support them, right? What are some of the top things? I know somebody mentioned in the comments space and housing for artists, right? What is falling on this hierarchy of needs for local creatives? Is it that they need space to collaborate together? Is it that they need more education? I think these are things that we can be asking and collecting data on over time to get better information to serve those folks.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this support the broader economy? Jobs, right? Everyone wants to know how many jobs are in the creative economy, how many jobs were created this quarter, this month, etc. Data like that is going to be really important. The spending. Our tourism department does a fantastic job
Mm-hmm.
of hosting all of these creative events across the state, to bring in tourists. So what are tourists coming to? And what's resonating with them? How do we put up, something cool in Breton to compete maybe with Trinidad? We have to be thinking about, these are just a few of the things, to be thinking about as you're collecting data. But again, I think there's some great resources to look at across the country. So we can definitely be looking at that.
Folks are asking if the recordings will be provided, and they will. All the sessions this week are being recorded and will be up. So another area that I wanted to sort of ask about is we are very fortunate in New Mexico to have native creativity and culture. In many ways, you could argue, I think that the Santa Fe economy is built on the heritage of native creativity and culture. How could we be doing a better job as a state, not just in supporting traditional arts, but in thinking about, like, for example, my friend Lee Francis, who some folks probably know, he does indigenous futurisms. He's from Laguna Pueblo. How could we as a state become a global leader in some of these maybe niche areas when you take the entire economy, but where we could shine? And we haven't figured out yet how we can really, how we can win, if you will, as a global leader for indigenous futurisms or indigenous media and I know your time at Meow Wolf, you probably spent some time thinking about that. What could this division do to capitalize, frankly, on how we're unique?
Absolutely. And, I think the art and culture in New Mexico has been built, because of the indigenous leaders and
Yeah.
indigenous creators and, have made our state the place that it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And are, continuing to serve and the importance of that. I think one of the things that the resources that comes to mind, Alice, is Canada. Canada has done a lot to support the Indigenous peoples as an entire country, right? This is not just a city or state, but I think it absolutely starts at the
Mm-hmm.
city and state level of making sure we have land acknowledgements. It is an important piece. And just making sure that we're doing the basic things to make sure that Indigenous peoples want to collaborate and want to work together. I think that there are amazing organizations like the Poe Cultural Center that is
Yeah.
such a cultural
They're
resource for
partners
us.
on this. I'm guessing you know that. Poe is
Yeah,
amazing.
they are, they're hosting as part of this this event this week. They're hosting a Path to Prosperity
Yep,
Indigenous Entrepreneurs event.
yep, yep,
And so, that is the exact type of thing that, that we need to be supporting and elevating, and not only elevating that event is happening, but elevating the entrepreneurs who are
yeah,
participating in programs
yeah.
like that. That there are so many amazing folks, around the state. I also want to mention, you asked about contemporary Native art.
Hmm.
IIA is in our backyard.
Oh my gosh,
IIA
yeah,
is the Institute for American Indian Arts, and is the only four-year institution dedicated to Native American art. And
yeah,
so,
it's
the importance of, that organization, and our pueblos is also super important to, again, how we are supporting them. But again, I think Canada started with, the basics of making
yeah,
sure that folks are represented, folks are in, not only at the tables, but part of those conversations, and making sure that they are leading initiatives. That it's
mhm,
not somebody deciding, hey, what's happening out at Taos Pueblo, that there are leaders from Taos Pueblo deciding what is happening in their
right.
community. So, I think that there are some great things and great, again, examples that we can look to, and, establishing those relationships.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really hearing partnerships. We did a program in New Zealand this year for Maori entrepreneurs, and it ended up having an exchange element of Native people in the US and Native people in New Zealand, and it was really fun. And one of the things that we learned is that in New Zealand, all New Zealanders can do very basic Maori language. They can say hello, goodbye, please, thank you. They learn it. All people in New Zealand learn the Maori language in school. And I thought, God, I mean, that's a really different take on how to value place and people and culture and language. And when I asked a woman at the embassy, the U.S. embassy, I said, you start your emails with Maori language. And she said, oh, I'm so proud of it. I mean, I don't really speak it, but I'm so proud of it. And I thought, that's amazing that because I think she's from Iowa, American, living, doing embassy work down there. And I think there are opportunities here for us to weave Native culture into who we all are as in our daily lives that would open pathways for new areas of innovation. And I don't see other states really with that capacity. New Mexico is unique in that regard, So I just, you said land acknowledgements, and I think everything from the naming of places to how we greet each other, there are a lot of places where we could bring forward indigenous knowledge and culture. Um, so one last question I have, and folks, I'm doing a better job than I had hoped on tracking the questions. So feel free to ask questions in the Q&A area. I usually lose that thread, but I haven't. So my last question is the hard one, and it's the who cares? Who cares? Who cares if we have art? Who cares if we have creativity? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to us as individuals, as people in a family, in a community, in a place? How can it, we have so many problems these days. How can art and creativity help us as individuals and as communities? We talk a lot about the money and the economy side, and that's not really why I do the work I do. I'm sure it's not why you do the work you do. But people have to have thriving businesses to be able to pay rent. But when we knock it back, Danica, to the brass tacks, who cares? Why does this matter?
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned earlier that when we look at the world today and the future of our planet, creativity is the number one resource we have. And, we have to be looking at imagining a brighter future together. And I think that creativity is going to be the only way that we imagine that brighter future. And the facts are that creative people are more resilient and adaptable in this changing world, that creative companies are more competitive and outperform other folks by as much as 4% is the statistic I found. That creativity promotes positive well-being and positive mental health. And as we mentioned too, that only 1% of national grant funding goes to the arts. And that creativity and what we're talking about, isn't about the art we create. It's actually about the people. It's about the people who are creating, the people who are part of this, and that creative people can spark and catalyze communities for good. That those folks can create more innovation and entrepreneurship in the community. We've seen that across New Mexico already happening. That creative people can create a lot of human development and opportunities for workforce training, internships, all sorts of things that benefit youth and the people of tomorrow. And that creativity is also about, again, this cross-sector collaborations and partnerships, that, creative people are not doing things alone. Heck, I had a concert on my front porch today because folks were practicing, my neighbors were practicing and set up on the porch, right? And it was a guitarist, a bassist, I was like, there was like 7 of them. And I was, I don't know all the musicians they play, but that this is, creativity is not happening in a vacuum. Creativity is all around us. And so, I've mentioned how important that creativity is for the future of who we are. And the only way we're going to find ourselves in a more sustainable planet is through creativity. So I think we should all care about it, Alice.
I agree. Do you worry though that we saddle creativity now with and it has to make money? Because I worry about that. I mean, and that's my job. And I could rightfully be blamed for being one of the people who has helped drive the national global conversation around creativity can be economically valuable. And I believe that art for art's sake also matters. How do you think about that?
Absolutely. It's a balancing effort. And, well, if we were seeing that play out, the art versus the business, TBD on, what happens there. But, the importance of art for art's sake is there. I myself practice it. Hopefully I try and do my daily, but, not as good as my own daily practice of painting. But we have to be doing this again, together, and making sure that we are looking at the future of who we want to be as people, as local economies, and representing everybody. And the creative is very different, and creative can look very different. My husband's in software, and like that guy makes art on the computer all day long.
Yeah.
I'm a creative problem solver is what I call myself. And there are so many different ways to be creative. And, I think it is challenging when we put those monetary numbers behind it. But I think we have to put monetary, Alice, but we also have to put some of those, feel good things that are just, we have to have goals around, hey, we just need more public art, period. It doesn't need to be necessarily tied to how much money that art makes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot is that we're moving away from the industrial economy. And we sort of had this period where people talked about the knowledge economy. But in many ways, I think a lot of us were still sort of cogs in a system with the knowledge economy. And if the creative economy becomes the overarching economy where people are truly making a living based on their intellectual property, their ideas, and machines maybe, and this is a little science fiction-y, right? So I'm just sharing for everybody, like, what do I think about when I'm driving I-25, right? But I think, what if 80% of human beings were able to just do creative work and spend time with their thoughts and their ideas and people they share thoughts and ideas and they make things with? And we went away from this sort of industrialized notion of human beings have to have output and, we have to measure their ROI and how much time on that machine. And I think we're moving away from that industrialized economy, but I don't know that we know what's next. And I hope it's based on creativity and enabling all people to really thrive and bring forward their own unique stories. But I'm not quite sure how we get there. And I do think government in partnership with private sector has a role to play. I also think other entities that we almost don't even know what they might be will have a role to play. So I'm just sharing weird ideas in my head. That's all. There's no question.
I wanted to mention, I wanted to mention Meow Wolf, I helped certify the company as a certified B corporation.
Oh, yeah.
And, that B is for public benefit.
Yeah.
And, it's a rigorous 200 plus question assessment that you go through. And there are more and more companies. I think this year, I just met with the B Lab folks. Like this year alone, like 10,000, or sorry, I think last year, sorry, what year am I in? It's June. 2023, more than 10,000 businesses tried to be a B Corp. And the organization that does that certification couldn't keep up with the demand. And so we are seeing a shift happening in the business world, and it's happening, in these coalitions, right? Again, I think the certification is really important for, just all businesses to be thinking about and for organizations to be looking at, because it is signaling that the economy is changing. Instead of just, that profit-driven economy, this is a balance of environmental sustainability, and, the support of people. And so, it's how does your company do on all of these metrics, not just profitability.
Not just how much money did you make for people who already had money? Yeah. No, it's really important. It's exciting. I personally feel excited about like Gen Z and millennials and their values and where they're pushing the economy. I think it's an exciting time. So, well, if people don't have more questions, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I am so grateful to Danika for spending an hour with us, and your expertise along the lines of local government and private sector partnerships and the creative economy is probably unparalleled. I don't know anybody who's thought about it or done as much work in that space as you. So thank you so much for being here. And we'll make sure that everybody gets a link to the recordings. And if anybody has any questions, I'll hang out for just a minute about the week or the live events. There are 12 live events across the state. So there could be something in your community if you were hoping to go to something that's not Zoom. But we hope everybody appreciates us saying, well, Zoom made it really accessible for everyone across New Mexico. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me, Alice. Thank you to Alice and Creative Startups and the New Mexico Economic Development Division, as well as the new Creative Industries Division. So thanks for having me. And thank you all on the Zoom. It was great to be with you.
Talk soon, y'all.